America has had some truly spectacular vacation spots over the years, places that drew millions of people, made towns rich, and felt like they'd last forever. They didn't. Here are 10 forgotten American vacation spots that are now dead. Number 10. Grossinger's Catskill Resort, Liberty, New York. Before cheap airfare existed, wealthy New Yorkers didn't fly to Miami or Cancun. They drove 2 hours upstate to a stretch of mountains in New York called the Catskills. And at the center of it all was Grossinger's. It started humbly enough. In 1913, a family of Austrian Jewish immigrants, Asher and Malka Grossinger, moved to Sullivan County, New York, and began renting out rooms to vacationers from the city. Malka cooked, their daughter Jenny played hostess, and within a few years, what had started as a simple boarding house became something nobody could have predicted. By the mid-20th century, Grossinger's had grown into a 1,200-acre resort empire. It had its own post office, its own airstrip, 35 buildings, a dining room that seated 1,300 guests, and an indoor pool that was the envy of the region. Over 150,000 people visited every year. A 1954 review in Commentary magazine compared it to Bergdorf Goodman. The boxer Rocky Marciano trained there. Entertainers like Jerry Lewis, Eddie Fisher, Milton Berle, and Milton Brooks, essentially the entire comedy universe of mid-century America, performed regularly in its nightclub. Eddie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds even got married there. Grossinger's was also the inspiration for the fictional Kellerman's Mountain Resort in the 1987 film Dirty Dancing. If you've seen the movie, you have some idea of what the place felt like, except the real thing was considerably bigger. Then the 1960s arrived, and with them, affordable air travel. Suddenly, those same New York families who used to pack into their cars for the Catskills were flying to Florida, to Puerto Rico, to Europe. Why drive upstate when you can fly somewhere warm? The resort struggled throughout the 70s, and when Jenny Grossinger, the woman who had been the beating heart of the place, died in 1972, the decline became almost irreversible. In August 1984, in what was almost certainly the most desperate marketing move in Catskills history, the resort held a Woodstock weekend to celebrate the 15th anniversary of the 1969 festival. It featured tie-dye workshops, a midnight screening of the Woodstock documentary, and a performance by David Clayton Thomas. It didn't help. In 1986, the Grossinger family sold the property to a hotel company called Servico for $9 million. That same year, the main hotel closed for good. The buildings deteriorated for decades. Developers came and went with grand plans, a casino, a luxury spa, a golf resort. None of it happened. The main structures were finally demolished in 2018, and what little remained burned in a fire in August 2022. The broader Catskills resort region that Grossinger's anchored, known as the Borscht Belt, a network of hotels and resorts that had once hosted as many as 500 properties and 150,000 guests annually, essentially ceased to exist alongside it. The Concord Resort Hotel, Grossinger's main rival, survived a few years longer before going bankrupt in 1997 and closing in 1998. The Homowack Lodge, Kutsher's Country Club, Brown's Hotel. One by one, they all went. The forests of Sullivan County are now dotted with the concrete foundations of a world that existed for barely 50 years. What had once been called the Waldorf in the Catskills ended as a pile of rubble. Number 9. The Salton Sea Riviera, Southern California. Most people know the Salton Sea today as that sad, shrinking, foul-smelling lake in the California desert that occasionally makes the news because of its toxic dust. What most people don't know is that in the 1950s and early 1960s, it was one of the most popular vacation destinations in all of California. The Salton Sea itself was created by accident. In 1905, an irrigation canal feeding water from the Colorado River into California's Imperial Valley failed, and for nearly 2 years, the entire flow of the Colorado River poured into a dry desert basin. By the time engineers stopped it in 1907, the basin had filled with water, and the Salton Sea, California's largest lake, was born. By the 1950s, Real estate developers had figured out that warm desert weather plus a big lake was a recipe for money. Resort communities bloomed along the shoreline: Bombay Beach, Salton City, Desert Shores, North Shore. The North Shore Beach and Yacht Club opened in 1959 as the largest marina in Southern California. Celebrities flocked to the area. Frank Sinatra was a regular. The Beach Boys performed there. The Marx Brothers vacationed nearby. Bing Crosby and Dean Martin were reportedly spotted around the lake on multiple occasions. At its peak, the Salton Sea was drawing more visitors annually than Yosemite National Park. The area was marketed as a Palm Springs with water and a miracle in the desert. Bombay Beach alone had around 1,200 residents and a packed social scene. Sonia Herbert, who has lived at Bombay Beach since 1974, remembers those days. It was the Riviera of California. People would come with their boats and go fishing, water skiing, swimming. It was wonderful. There were 5 bars in this town that were packed every weekend. Then the lake started dying. Because the Salton Sea has no natural outlet, water can only leave through evaporation. That means salt accumulates, constantly, permanently. By the late 1970s, salinity levels were rising fast enough to kill fish. Hurricane Kathleen hit in 1976, flooding parts of Bombay Beach so severely that a section of the town was essentially submerged. The smell of rotting fish and hydrogen sulfide gas became inescapable. Residents described being able to taste the air. By the early 1980s, most of the resort infrastructure was abandoned. Hotels and marinas were left to decay. Today, Bombay Beach has a population of around 231 people. The exposed lakebed generates toxic dust that drifts as far as Los Angeles. The lake itself has shrunk dramatically, and the remaining water is now saltier than the ocean. A vacation paradise turned into an environmental cautionary tale, one that somehow almost nobody saw coming until it was far too late. It's worth noting that California has spent over $1.2 billion trying to manage the Salton Sea's decline, including pouring billions of gallons of water onto the exposed lakebed each year to suppress the toxic dust. Those efforts have not reversed the damage. The sea continues to shrink. The communities that once lined its shores remain mostly empty. And if you drive out to Bombay Beach today, you'll find art installations among the ruins. Local and visiting artists have been creating pieces in the town since around 2016, which is one way of coping with the fact that your home became a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Number 8. Asbury Park, New Jersey. In the decades before World War II, Asbury Park was New Jersey's crown jewel. Founded in 1871 by New York industrialist James A. Bradley as a planned seaside resort, it grew into one of the most sophisticated beach destinations on the entire East Coast. At its pre-war peak, the city had more than 200 hotels. Glenn Miller and Artie Shaw played its dance halls. The Marx Brothers headlined at the Paramount Theater. The Boardwalk, designed in part by the same Boars architects who designed New York's Grand Central Terminal, stretched along a mile of Atlantic coastline with carousels, arcades, and entertainment pavilions. The convention center hosted thousands. Every summer, the city filled with visitors from Philadelphia and New York who came for the ocean breeze and the shows. Then the post-war years arrived and basically dismantled the whole thing piece by piece. The Garden State Parkway opened in 1947, which meant tourists were no longer limited to mass transit to reach beach towns. Suddenly, Asbury Park had competition from dozens of other shore destinations. In the 1950s and 1960s, the city's middle class relocated to new suburbs further down the coast. Shopping malls pulled business away from downtown. And in 1970, civil unrest tore through the city, causing over $4 million in property damage and devastating the West Side Business District, which was never rebuilt. By the 1980s, the entertainment district had largely collapsed. The once grand casino and carousel house stood abandoned. Hotels were boarded up. The boardwalk, which had once been the pride of the Jersey Shore, was described by more than a few people who were there as looking like a war zone. At its worst, Asbury Park earned the nickname Beirut by the Shore. The city has been going through a slow revival since the early 2000s, with new restaurants, bars, and music venues drawing visitors back. The Stone Pony, which opened in 1974 and became famous as a launching pad for Bruce Springsteen and Bon Jovi, still operates. Convention Hall has been stabilized. The Paramount Theater has undergone restoration work. But the full-scale grandeur of what Asbury Park once was, those 200 hotels, those glittering ballrooms, the Marx Brothers on stage at the Paramount, that version of the city is gone and isn't coming back. Number 7. The Baker Hotel, Mineral Wells, Texas. Mineral Wells, Texas made its name on water. In 1881, a local settler named Judge J.A. Lynch discovered that the well water on his property seemed to have unusual medicinal properties. Word spread, and before long, people were making pilgrimages to this small North Texas town to drink from its mineral springs. By the 1920s, it had become one of Texas's premier resort destinations. The Baker Hotel, a 14-story, 450-room Spanish colonial revival tower, opened on November the 22nd, 1929. It was the first hotel outside a major metropolitan area in Texas to offer air conditioning. The second floor was reserved entirely for a bath and massage suite, with mineral baths, steam rooms, and salt rubs. It had 2 ballrooms, a bowling alley, an Olympic-sized swimming pool, and a rooftop restaurant called the Cloud Room, with sweeping views of the Texas countryside. The guest list over the decades read like a Hollywood roll call: Clark Gable, Judy Garland, Ronald Reagan, and Lyndon Johnson. There's even a local legend that Bonnie and Clyde checked in once under an alias, which sounds completely plausible given the era. Lawrence Welk played the ballroom. So did Guy Lombardo and Paul Whiteman. The hotel's decline was tied directly to the military. Nearby Fort Wolters generated enormous business for the Baker throughout World War II, pushing the town's population close to 30,000. When the fort closed in 1946, that population evaporated almost immediately, and business at the Baker dropped sharply. The hotel stumbled along through the 1950s, hosted a few political conventions, and then its owner, Earl Baker, announced he would close it on his 71st birthday. He did exactly that, shutting the doors in May 1963. A brief attempt to reopen it in 1965 ended in failure. The hotel closed permanently in 1972. For the next 5 decades, it stood as a 14-story monument to neglect, too expensive to demolish, too expensive to restore, too prominent to ignore. It was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1982 while still abandoned, which is one of the more bittersweet achievements a building can have. A major restoration effort began in 2019, with developers hoping to reopen the building as a luxury hotel and spa. As of now, work is still ongoing. The project has been described as the largest private restoration of a National Register property in Texas history. Plans call for restoring the Cloud Room on the top floor, the mineral bath facilities, and the ballrooms. Original chandeliers, moldings, and fixtures have been cataloged and set aside for reinstallation. Whether the Baker Hotel will ever welcome guests again remains one of the great unresolved questions of Texas preservation history. But for the first time in half a century, there are real, funded reasons to believe it might actually happen. Number 6. Coney Island, Brooklyn, New York. Yes, Coney Island still exists. Yes, people still go there. But the Coney Island of today, with its one remaining amusement park, its hot dog stands, and its rickety but beloved Cyclone roller coaster, is a faint shadow of what Coney Island once was, and it's worth understanding just how dramatic that fall has been. In the early 20th century, Coney Island had 3 massive competing amusement parks: Steeplechase Park, Luna Park, and Dreamland, all operating simultaneously on a stretch of beachfront in Brooklyn. Luna Park, which opened in 1903, was lit by over 1 million electric light bulbs and drew enormous crowds from across the country. Dreamland opened in 1904 and was even larger. Together, these parks essentially invented the concept of the American amusement park as we know it. Walt Disney, who visited New York regularly, was a documented regular at the original Luna Park. It served as a significant inspiration for what he would eventually build in Anaheim. At its peak, Coney Island drew over 1 million visitors on a single summer day. The subway extension to Stillwell Avenue in 1920 made it accessible to working-class New Yorkers for a nickel fare, earning it the nickname the Nickel Empire and cementing its status as the people's playground. Then, the fires came. Dreamland burned entirely in 1911. The original Luna Park declined during World War II and closed for good in 1946. After that, the neighborhood's decline accelerated. Crime increased, the beach and boardwalk deteriorated, and the last of the great parks eventually fell too, which is a story that gets its own entry later on this list. By the 1980s, the former wonder of New York was struggling with arson, poverty, and decay. The Cyclone roller coaster, which had opened in 1927, was still running. It's one of the most durable structures in amusement park history, but the grandeur surrounding it was gone. A new Luna Park opened in 2010, and Coney Island has seen some genuine improvement since then. But the golden age of Coney Island, that incomparable, electric, slightly mad era when it was the most visited amusement destination in the world, ended decades ago and will not be returning. Number 5, Elkmont, Great Smoky Mountains, Tennessee. Most people who visit Great Smoky Mountains National Park today have no idea that there's a ghost resort hiding inside it. Deep in the woods near the Jakes Creek trailhead lies Elkmont, a collection of decaying cabins and clubhouses that was once one of the most exclusive summer retreats in Tennessee. It started before the park existed. In the early 1900s, a logging company built a railroad into the Elkmont area, and the resulting access made the valley attractive to wealthy families from Knoxville. 2 private social clubs emerged, the Appalachian Club and the Wonderland Club, and their members built summer cottages, dance halls, and recreational facilities along the Little River. At its peak, Elkmont was a full-fledged seasonal resort community with dozens of privately owned cabins. When the Great Smoky Mountains National Park was established in the 1930s, the club members negotiated long-term leases that let them continue using their cabins. For decades, well-connected Tennessee families summered in Elkmont as they always had, while the park grew around them. The leases were extended multiple times. By the 1990s, those leases had expired. The National Park Service declined to renew them, and the cabins were left to the forest. What followed was one of the more visible arguments in American preservation history. Preservationists wanted the structures saved as historic artifacts, while others argued they should be demolished and the land returned to its natural state. Eventually, the Park Service stabilized several of the most significant structures, and Elkmont is now listed on the National Register of Historic Places. You can hike to it today and walk through what remains. The vine-covered ruins of what was once a private paradise for Tennessee's elite. The Appalachian Club clubhouse and several of the original family cottages still stand in varying states of preservation. It's one of the more quietly haunting places in the entire national park system, and also one of the least visited, since most Smoky Mountains tourists have no idea it exists, which is fitting in a way. A private retreat that kept to itself in life has managed to keep to itself in death. Number 4, Rhyolite, Nevada. Most ghost towns in the American West went bust because a mine ran dry. Rhyolite, Nevada is no exception, but what makes it stand out is the sheer speed at which it rose and fell, and the level of civilization it managed to build in the middle of the Mojave Desert before vanishing almost entirely. In 1904, a prospector named Shorty Harris found gold in the Bullfrog Hills, about 120 miles northwest of Las Vegas. Within 3 years, Rhyolite had a population of between 5,000 and 8,000 people. A 3-story bank building, a train depot, a school, an opera house, paved streets, electric lights, running water, and a stock exchange. Investors poured money in from across the country. The town had multiple newspapers and over 50 saloons, which is a ratio that says something about the priorities of the Nevada mining era. Tom Kelly, a local builder, constructed a house made entirely from 51,000 glass bottles, mostly beer and whiskey bottles, which still stands in Rhyolite today and is one of the more improbable tourist attractions in the American West. When the financial panic of 1907 hit, Investment in Western mining dried up almost overnight. Rhyolite's mines became unprofitable. The bank failed. The railroad cut service. By 1910, the population was down to a few hundred. By 1920, the town was effectively empty. The 1930 census recorded one person living in Rhyolite. What remains today, the skeletal walls of the bank building, the train depot, Kelly's Bottle House, has been preserved and is open to visitors. It's a genuinely startling place to walk through. Buildings that took years to construct and were meant to anchor a city for generations stand alone in the desert, and there's essentially nobody for miles. The bank's concrete shell rises 3 stories against the sky with no roof and no interior, framed by Nevada mountains. It's one of those rare places where the emptiness is the attraction. Rhyolite had its entire rise and fall within about 15 years, which is probably a record even by the boom and bust standards of the American West. Number 3, Hot Springs, Arkansas. Before Las Vegas existed as a destination, before Atlantic City had its casinos, before Miami Beach became a thing, there was Hot Springs, Arkansas. And for a stretch of roughly 60 years, from the late 1800s through the early 1960s, it was arguably the most wide-open, glamorous, and morally flexible resort city in the United States. The draw was the water. Hot Springs sits in the Ouachita Mountains, and underneath those mountains, rainwater that fell thousands of years ago percolates deep into the earth, gets superheated by surrounding rock, and emerges from 47 natural springs at around 143 degrees Fahrenheit. Native American tribes had used the springs as a gathering place for generations. By the mid-1800s, grand bathhouses lined what became known as Bathhouse Row along Central Avenue, offering mineral soaks, steam rooms, salt rubs, and massages to visitors from across the country. In the 1930s alone, over 1 million baths a year were given in Hot Springs. The federal government had actually established the Hot Springs Reservation back in 1832, making it the oldest site currently in the national park system, 40 years older than Yellowstone. Though that federal protection didn't stop the city from doing whatever it wanted on the surrounding streets, and what it wanted for most of its history was to gamble. Illegal gambling had been embedded in Hot Springs since the Civil War era, and by the early 20th century, it operated in plain sight, protected by a local government that was thoroughly and cheerfully corrupt. Mayor Leo McLaughlin, who ran the city for 22 years, starting in 1926, openly allowed gambling as a campaign promise. The result was that Hot Springs became America's premier open city, a place where the laws that applied everywhere else simply didn't apply here. Al Capone was a regular visitor and took up part-time residence in Suite 443 of the Arlington Hotel, often renting the entire 4th floor for himself and his entourage. Lucky Luciano was arrested on the promenade behind the Ozark bathhouse, while strolling with the city's chief of detectives, which tells you something about how cozy those relationships were. Oni Madden, one of the founders of the New York Mob and the man who ran the Cotton Club in Harlem, retired to Hot Springs in 1935 and became, by most accounts, the city's unofficial overlord until his death in 1965. The Southern Club on Central Avenue, one of the city's most popular gambling houses, had an elevated table reserved specifically for Capone where he could keep an eye on the whole room. But it wasn't only gangsters. Babe Ruth had first come to Hot Springs as a young pitcher and returned repeatedly to soak in the baths and play golf. At its peak, 5 major league teams held spring training in Hot Springs. Performers like Liberace, the McGuire sisters, and Sarah Bernhardt played the clubs. It was reportedly during a rehearsal at the Black Orchid Club in Hot Springs in 1963 that Tony Bennett first sang "I Left My Heart in San Francisco." The city had that kind of pull. Then in 1964, after years of federal pressure, Arkansas Governor Orval Faubus, whose administration had long tolerated the gambling, finally allowed a crackdown. State law enforcement moved in, seized the gambling equipment, and shut down what the federal government had formerly called the site of the largest illegal gambling operation in the United States. The gambling operators dispersed, and with them went a significant portion of the money, the visitors, and the entire reason most of the city's resort economy existed. Hot Springs fell hard. The bathhouses deteriorated. Hotels that had once hosted presidents and mob bosses sat half empty. The city that had positioned itself as the American spa, a place where you could take the waters in the morning, place a bet in the afternoon, and catch a show in the evening, had no idea how to function without the gambling that had been the engine of the whole operation for nearly a century. It's only in recent decades that Hot Springs has found its footing again, leaning into its history rather than away from it. The Gangster Museum of America on Central Avenue now celebrates the very characters the city once tried to pretend it didn't know. Two of the original Bathhouse Row buildings still offer traditional mineral baths. The Arlington Hotel is still operating, but the wild, lawless, improbable resort that once made this small Arkansas mountain town the destination of choice for both Babe Ruth and Al Capone is long gone. Number 2. Steeplechase Park, Coney Island, New York. Steeplechase Park deserves its own entry separate from the broader Coney Island story because it had one of the longest runs and most abrupt endings of any American amusement park. George C. Tillieu opened Steeplechase Park in 1897, naming it after its signature attraction, a mechanical horse race that sent riders side by side around the perimeter of the park on steel tracks. The ride was simultaneously thrilling and, by modern standards, mildly terrifying, which made it enormously popular. When a fire destroyed Steeplechase in 1907, Tillieu didn't close. He put up signs charging admission to view the ruins, rebuilt and reopened. That's the kind of owner who builds something that lasts. The park ran for another 57 years after that fire, surviving the Great Depression, 2 World Wars, and the decline of most of its neighbors. While Luna Park and Dreamland burned and closed around it, Steeplechase kept going. Tillieu died in 1914, and his children continued to operate the park. It remained a family business. By the 1960s, it was one of the last remnants of the old Coney Island amusement culture. Then, in 1964, Tillieu's heirs decided they'd had enough. They sold the property to a developer named Fred Trump. Yes, that family, who wanted to build apartments. Steeplechase closed on September 20th, 1964. Before demolition began, Trump threw a demolition party on the property and invited guests to throw bricks through the park's remaining stained glass windows. Whether that detail makes you laugh or wince probably depends on your general disposition. The park was torn down, the apartments were never built, and the land sat vacant for years, before eventually being incorporated into the broader Coney Island redevelopment. The famous Steeplechase funny face logo, that unsettling grinning face that appeared on everything in the park, became an iconic image of lost American leisure, reproduced endlessly in books and documentaries about New York's past. Number 1. The Poconos Honeymoon Resorts, Pennsylvania. From roughly the 1950s through the 1980s, a particular stretch of northeastern Pennsylvania known as the Pocono Mountains was the undisputed honeymoon capital of the eastern United States. Couples who couldn't afford a European trip and weren't interested in anything too adventurous drove up to the Poconos, checked into heart-shaped whirlpool bathtubs, and called it a honeymoon. The resort industry there was built almost entirely around this concept. Penn Hills Resort, Cove Haven, Mount Airy Lodge, and dozens of others competed for newlywed business with increasingly elaborate amenities, round beds, mirrors on the ceiling, 7-foot champagne glass-shaped whirlpool tubs, and advertising that was aggressively, cheerfully kitschy. Mount Airy Lodge ran television commercials so frequently in the 1970s and 1980s that its jingle became something approaching a regional cultural artifact. At its peak in the 1970s, the Poconos honeymoon resort industry was a serious business, drawing hundreds of thousands of couples annually. The resorts employed thousands of local workers and generated substantial economic activity throughout the region. Then, the 1990s arrived, and the cultural moment that had created these places simply passed. Younger couples no longer considered a mountain resort in Pennsylvania the romantic ideal. Airlines made international travel significantly cheaper and more accessible. Las Vegas repositioned itself as a legitimate honeymoon destination. All-inclusive Caribbean resorts offered sun, beach, and swimming pools in a single package that was often no more expensive than a Poconos weekend. Penn Hills Resort closed in 1998. Cove Haven, which had managed to survive longer than most of its competitors, closed in 2014. Mount Airy Lodge, the one with the ubiquitous television commercials, was demolished and replaced by a casino. One by one, the heart-shaped tubs were disconnected, the round beds were dragged out, and the mirrors came down from the ceilings. Photographer Pablo Iglesias Maurer documented what remained of several of these resorts in the years after their closure. What he found was startling. Indoor swimming pools turned into indoor gardens, lobby furniture still sitting exactly where it had been left the day the doors closed. The images inspire emotion that's really difficult to put your finger on, he said. It's a little melancholy. That seems about right. There's something quietly devastating about the end of a place that was, at its core, in the business of making people happy. These 10 places all had their moment. Some of them had several decades of moments. Then the world moved on, the money dried up, the climate changed, or the people who loved them grew old. And what had been thriving, living destinations became ruins, parking lots, or plaques on a wall. America has always been good at building things that feel permanent. It's not quite as good at keeping them that way. The pattern repeats itself reliably. A place becomes popular, the infrastructure grows around the popularity. The popularity eventually shifts somewhere else, and the infrastructure stands there getting older and emptier until someone demolishes it or nature takes it back. Sometimes there's a fire, sometimes there's a flood, sometimes it's just cheaper airfare to somewhere more interesting. What makes these places worth remembering isn't the spectacle of their decline. It's the reminder that millions of real people loved them. The families who drove to Grossinger's every summer, the couples who honeymooned in the Poconos, the kids who rode the mechanical horse at Steeplechase Park or ran down the Coney Island boardwalk. Those experiences were real, even if the places that held them are now gone. If you found this video interesting, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. There are plenty more stories like these where that came from. We'll see you in the next one.